Whether you're a fan of snakes and ladders or more of a checkers connoisseur, some of your favorite board games are probably centuries older than you might realize. And while we know exactly how to play the most modern versions of plenty of games, there are some board games that are so old that we've lost all records of how to play them. Now, researchers are trying to get them back. While not all of the world's oldest games would have had standardized rule sets, archaeologists have figured out how people played some of these ancient games, and they're willing to roll the dice and speculate about the rules of a few others. So here are 6 of the world's oldest board games and how we relearned to play them. Our first game, Patolli, comes from Mesoamerica. Patolli was played on soft, flexible mats, and that made the game very portable, but also means that none of the original boards survive today. While we aren't 100% sure of its age, we do know that Patolli predates Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas. Some evidence even suggests it was played as long ago as 250 CE in the central Mexican city-state of Teotihuacan. It's thought to have been associated with betting and drinking, and often drew large crowds of spectators. Europeans witnessed Mayans playing Patolli in the 1500s and described the game in their journals. Then the game rapidly declined in popularity, probably because colonization. From those journals, we know that the most common board shape was a large cross. Using beans as casting dice, players advanced their pieces along the arms of the cross, racing along the board. Marked squares along the board might have corresponded to penalties. Despite the journal entries, a complete set of rules was never recorded. But since Patolli was played by so many different Mesoamerican groups, it's almost certain the rules evolved over the centuries, and that cities had their own preferred variations of board configuration and gameplay. It's not uncommon for games to evolve like that. Just look at our next one, Polus. The earliest known reference to this ancient Greek game was made by an Athenian poet around 440 BCE, but our best source for the rules comes from a scholar who mentioned the game 600 years later. A Polus board was divided into squares, and there were 2 colors of game pieces, 1 color for each player. Pieces could move forward, backward, and right or left. The goal of the game was to capture the opponent's pieces by trapping them between 2 pieces of your own color. Sadly, only 1 Polus board exists in the archaeological record. But there's a silver lining, because it seems to have evolved directly into another game we have more information on, Latrunculi. Latrunculi has been around since at least 100 BCE, based on an account of a Roman senator playing a few rounds that were so high stakes that they made it into the history books. And some of our best records of the rules of the game come from an unlikely source: poetry. The poet Ovid and another anonymous writer both described Latrunculi, albeit in a fairly lyrical fashion. Each described skillful acts of capture and evasion, but never came right out and described the actual gameplay or board configurations. Typical poets. This has left scholars to deduce the mechanics and starting positions based on what the poets did and didn't say. For example, Ovid wrote that pieces can move in straight lines, either forward or backward, and presumably sideways. And because the poets never described the starting placement of the pieces, scholars have interpreted this to mean that selecting starting points for your pieces was part of the strategy of the game. But for the remainder of the rules, researchers have turned to an unexpected ally: AI. They developed a few plausible rule sets and then set AI players against each other to test each version of the game. Based on the progression of these simulated games, researchers isolated rule set variations that provided consistent and fun gameplay, and here's what they found. We think that a game of Latrunculi starts with players alternately placing pieces on an empty board. Once all the pieces were placed, players would take turns moving their pieces with the goal of capturing their opponent's pieces by trapping them between 2 of their own pieces. You could also jump over another player's pieces, like in checkers. Latrunculi didn't survive the fall of the Roman Empire, but it did probably evolve into an equally mysterious Celtic game called Fheil. The ancient Celts played this game for centuries, probably having learned it when the Romans invaded Celtic territories. It fell out of popularity in the British Isles around 1000 CE, and like Latrunculi, its rules were lost to time. But Latrunculi isn't the oldest game with jumping game pieces. That particular move may have come from Egypt. Around 1400 BCE, someone started to engrave a grid of squares with diagonal lines into the roof of an Egyptian temple, but it looks like they gave up before they finished it, possibly because they messed up the line spacing, which relatable. But archaeologists think this was more than just a cool pattern, and that these diagonal lines may be the board for a game called Alquerque. Alquerque was first mentioned by name in the writings of a 10th century Arab scholar / poet more than 2,000 years after that Egyptian engraver messed up his game board. This description of the game indicates it was brought to Spain by the Moors. Later in the 13th century, its rules were outlined more extensively. They described a 5x5 board of squares with alternating diagonals crossing the board. Game pieces were placed at the intersections of lines, and players could move their pieces one space at a time or jump over the opponent's pieces to capture them. And if these rules sound kind of familiar, it might be because some researchers think Alquerque is a precursor to modern checkers. But that ancient carving and the 10th century description suggests that it might have been played for 2,000 years before it was brought to Spain. And it turns out that the people in northern Africa were pretty creative when it came to gaming, because this isn't even the oldest game from the region. But before we play our next game, here's a quick ad break. This SciShow video is supported by Brilliant, an online learning platform that helps you build real knowledge through lessons that you'll actually remember. We all want to know more stuff, and Brilliant helps you learn effectively so you understand and remember information the first time you learn it. And one way they do that is through their interactive platform. You get to play with the concepts you're learning about through puzzles, quizzes, and real-world data. And all that fun stuff helps you develop a learning habit to stay engaged day after day. So in a short period of time, you could explore all sorts of topics from AI to algebra. To try Brilliant for free, you can visit brilliant.org/scishow or scan the QR code on screen, or you can click the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Hounds and jackals originated in ancient Egypt and then spread throughout the known world. Board fragments have been discovered all across northern Africa and the Middle East, in places like Egypt, Syria, and Turkey. The boards came in many different styles, but some historical examples were shaped like a standing animal with an array of holes along its back. Animal-headed pegs were placed into the holes to serve as game pieces, and some of the boards even had little drawers where you could keep the pegs between games. Modern game designers, take note! A couple of murals in Egyptian tombs and a few drawings on papyrus seem to reference hounds and jackals, but there are no written records of the rules, and the murals don't include any text. Gaming experts think that players would have moved their pegs down the center of the board on separate parallel tracks, and the connections between the tracks probably indicate some type of conflict between pieces. Alternatively, these linked sets of holes could have been shortcuts or penalties, like in Snakes and Ladders, and certain decorated holes likely indicated progress or special bonuses, and we're pretty sure the largest hole at the end of the track was the finish line. Although these boards have not been discovered with dice nearby, all the context suggests that this was a chance-based racing game. No word yet on whether the winner is the hound or the jackal, though. Around the same time that Hounds and Jackals was popular in Egypt, another race game was sweeping Mesopotamia. Boards for the royal game of also called Game of 20 Squares, have been found across modern Pakistan, Syria, Iran, Turkey, Cyprus, and Crete, and the oldest one dates back to around 2500 BCE. And the royal game of is extra special because along with the boards themselves, researchers have found the rule book too. In the 1980s, a researcher was translating more than 100,000 tablets of cuneiform writing and came across what appeared to be a rule book, or rule tablet, I guess. This tablet was from the late Babylonian period, around 200 BCE, and the translator tried applying the rule set to every ancient board that had been discovered, and he eventually realized the rules perfectly matched boards for the royal game of The tablet specified that players would have cast dice or sticks and then raced to move their pieces along the board. If you landed on an opponent's piece, they would have to go back to the start, and certain spaces were decorated to indicate special advantages, like safety from being bumped back or getting to roll again. The first player to move all 7 of their pieces across the board won. This game was clearly very popular based on all of the places we found the boards. And it turns out that some players were into more than one game too. Archaeologists have discovered several examples of double-sided boards scattered across Egypt, with the royal game of on one side and our last and oldest game on the other. Senet is the oldest known board game in the world. Fragments of boards and game pieces dating back to at least 3000 BCE have been discovered in ancient Egyptian tombs, which makes sense. If you're packing for your eternal afterlife, you're gonna want something to pass the time. Senet was such an important part of Egyptian culture that by around 2600 BCE, game boards were explicitly listed as funerary components. The games seem to have been religiously significant and may have come to symbolize a soul's journey through the afterlife. Archaeologists have found murals in tombs depicting men playing Senet, some with captions describing aspects of the gameplay. They've also discovered religious texts that describe the game, but even with all these clues, we still don't know exactly how the ancient Egyptians played Senet. Rules have been inferred from these murals and snippets of text, as well as from the symbols that decorate the 30-square board. We think Senet was played by racing the pieces along the board. You'd determine how your pieces move by throwing casting sticks, which are like dice, but sticks, and players probably could have used blocking strategies like you'd use in modern backgammon. However it was played, it must have been fun, because Senet maintained its popularity throughout Egypt for at least 2,000 years. Reconstructing the rules to these classic games has been a massive collaboration between archaeologists, game scholars, and even citizen scientists. There's an online database with digitized versions of ancient games where you can play using dozens of other proposed rules. Game enthusiasts maintain the database and regularly propose new rules that seem to make sense based on what we know. There's so much for archaeologists and anthropologists to learn about ancient people based on their games. Broader trends like shifts from chance-based games to strategic skill-based games might reflect shifts in cultural priorities. It all makes you wonder what scholars will think when they find copies of our games thousands of years from now. Whether it's Settlers of Catan or Trivial Pursuit, I hope they think we have good taste.